first thing I always love to ask is this anyone's first time at a Beaches Museum and History Park event? Wonderful. Oh, it's only on, did you guys all plan to sit on this side? It's only on this side. Because our regulars know that the light shines in from that window, so they notice it. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome, thank you. I hope this isn't your last. We appreciate you being here. Good reminder. Thank you for that reminder, Palmer. Please silence your cell phones. That would be really nice and courteous of you to do. So just to give you guys a little update, first of all, also any members in the audience, museum members, wonderful, thank you so much. Our largest source of income at the Beaches Museum are individual donors, and members are included in that, so we appreciate you very much because you make it possible for us to do everything that we do on these 3 city blocks here between our history park and the museum down at the other end. A few things that we have coming up, we're a little quieter than normal here in the summer. I say that, but we are a lot louder because we have a lot of summer camp groups coming through. We're Mendocans, you guys know. We've been giving a lot of tours to a lot of kids, which is great. We love to do it. But as far as programming, we don't have another program until next month, August 17th. We have our own Brittany Cohill is going to be speaking on Manhattan Beach. It's part of her master's research project, so that's going to be a really interesting program, especially because you're thinking right now, what is Manhattan Beach? So come on August 17th and you will learn. Right now we also have the artwork of Thomas Hager up in our temporary exhibit space. Thomas is a fine art photographer, and he has his, can't remember the exact name of his show, but it's all tides, it's kind of ocean meets the shore type of theme. So it's really lovely, and it's worth the stop in, and of course, thanks to Edna Maxwell Dickinson, we are free of charge for regular admission to the museum, so you have no excuse not to come by. I also wanted to kind of give a little bit of a preview to a few things we have happening in the fall. And I want to recognize Jacqueline Bates is here, somewhere here. She's with Comer Beaches, and we have just gone into partnership with them for a speaker series in the fall that will be 4 different presentations on women artists. So an expert from Comer will be coming out. Yay! Okay. Exactly. So we're really excited to work with Comer on that, to bring some of their excellent programming out here to our excellent historic building. So it's going to look just like this, and we do invite you to keep an eye out for those and to come to those as your schedule allows. We have our art festival, October 14th and 15th. I'm going to go backwards. We have Train Day on September 9th. Who was at Train Day last year? Our first annual Train Day, Bob, the king of Train Day, the conductor of Train Day, I should probably say. Wonderful event, especially if you have kids that enjoy trains, and what kid doesn't enjoy trains, or if you have any big kids that enjoy trains. There are a lot of those too. It's a wonderful event, again, as always, open to the public, and we invite you to come out and enjoy that. If you aren't getting our emails already, please leave us your email address, or everything that we do you'll see in the Beaches Leader, you'll see on our website, Facebook page, etc., etc. So just keep an eye out for all that great program that we have coming up. As you came in, you might have grabbed a survey. Please do take a minute to fill that out. Good, bad, anything that we can improve, putting a curtain over that window so it doesn't blind you with the afternoon sun. These are the things that we're looking for to make your experience better. And then also the housekeeping of the bathrooms. Restrooms are located in the cabin just outside the doors and a little to the right. So now we're going to turn it over to our guest speaker. David Head is up here from UCF, so thank you for making that drive. Did you guys, anybody pick up on the music that I was playing earlier? Yeah. Pirates of the Caribbean, yeah. I can only assume living in Orlando that you ride that ride all the time. That's my vision of what your life is like. So, an expert in pirates, I mean, who gets to put that on their resume? So he's a historian, author, professor, lecturer. We're really excited to have him here. Obviously, you guys are too, so thank you for showing up in a big way today. And I'm going to turn it over to David Head.
So the first thing is to make sure I can be heard. Can be heard in the back, or do I should I use a microphone? Okay, I'm good? Okay, so leave that there. I teach. You want yes for microphone?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Oh, you gotta push it. Okay. Well, you test it out here. Yeah, let's try that. I can hold it, that's fine. It's fine? Yes, there we go. So I usually teach classes of 150 students or more. Well, by enrollment, there are 150 students. On the first day after tests, well, the first test at least, then it drops off somewhere there. So usually I don't need a microphone, even for large groups. Okay, but everybody can hear me now? Okay. And those of you in the front, if I see you cover your ears, I'll dial it back a little bit. So first of all, thank you for having me here, inviting me here to come and speak with you on this very hot evening here. I was over in the cabin across the way, and they have a picture. I guess it's the original people who built that cabin. The one guy has a beard down to like here. And all I could think of is, how did that guy not shave off his beard? Or maybe he just did for the summer and then grew it for the winter all the way around. I have no idea. But again, thank you for having me here. Thank you for coming out to listen to my presentation here today. So what I want to talk about is an episode of Florida history from 200 years ago, in a period of Florida history when this was still part of Spain, so the last days of Spanish Florida, and talk about Spanish Florida in the context of the Spanish-American Wars of Independence and the involvement of people from the United States unofficially becoming involved in the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, where the Spanish colonies were seeking their independence from Spain. So you have Spain, Spanish America, and the United States kind of all mixed in together. And there are pirates, so many different strands to the story coming out. So first of all, I want to, before we get to the pirates, you'll have to sit tight, be patient, and I have a little bit of context to talk about first. Okay? So some of the background to our story. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. These are happening, they start in 1808 and go through the 18-teens into the 1820s, where the various different colonies, many of them gained their independence at the end of that period. For the events that touch off the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, they grow out of the Napoleonic Wars. So the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon is fighting the various enemies in Europe. And one of the events in those wars, Napoleon from France invades the neighbors, Spain, and also Portugal. France, Napoleon invades Spain in 1808. He forces the Spanish king to abdicate. And then Napoleon places one of his own guys on the king to be the king of Spain. Can you guess who Napoleon appointed king of Spain? His brother, right, one of his brothers. He had many brothers. He would make them kings in various places, supposedly because he could trust them more than outsiders. Okay. So, I have two brothers. When I conquer somewhere, I'll be sure to appoint them king. And then we'll see if I can really trust them or not. So that's what he did. Now, so the king of Spain is set aside. Napoleon's brother is now the king. There are many Spanish people who do not like that. And they form a resistance. And as part of forming a resistance, they form these local governing bodies that are called juntas. And these juntas, they are set about for themselves to govern in the name of the deposed king. It's supposed to be temporary until the usurper, the outsider, can be defeated, ejected from the country, and the true king can come back. Okay, so that's what these juntas are, to govern in the king's name, the resistance to Napoleon's invasion. Those juntas are formed in both Spain itself, various towns in Spain, as well as in the colonies, in the Americas. Now, some of those juntas, especially in the colonies, they had two purposes. Ostensibly, on the surface, they're forming to govern until the king can return. But they also start talking about independence, whether or not the king returns. That's a convenient way to meet, to resist orders coming from Spain. You can say, well, we're not doing what you say because you're Napoleon. We're not going to follow Napoleon. We're good Spaniards. We're loyal to the king. We're going to run ourselves until the king gets back. But we'll solve that problem later. In that process, some of the juntas, they begin declaring independence. So independence from the temporary usurping government of Napoleon, but also independence from the rightful king of Spain, Fernando. And so independence is what they're declaring. The first of those is in Venezuela. Here's a painting of declaring independence in Venezuela that happens on July 4th in 1811, coincidental. So that happens in Venezuela first, but then other places in South America follow suit. There are significant numbers of people in Spanish America who remain loyal to the king. There are some who are loyal to Napoleon. So you get, it's both, the Spanish-American Wars of Independence are both a war for independence as well as a foreign war against France. So you have those two elements coming together at the same time. So multiple enemies overlapping. One measure that some of these Spanish-American governments take in order to fight for their independence is to commission privateers. They don't really have navies in the, or very much of a naval tradition. I guess they would have had the Spanish Navy, which they're not fighting against. They didn't have much of a naval tradition there, so they commissioned privateers, and many of the privateers are foreign, from Britain, from the United States, more so than from anywhere in Spanish America itself. Now, when I say the commissioned privateers, that simply raises the question of what is a privateer? Okay, it's a little bit more background here. A privateer is a privately owned warship. So it's not a naval vessel because it's not owned by the government. Usually these were merchant vessels that were converted to be able to carry out warfare, to be able to fight during a war. Now the critical thing that a privateer has is a commission, a license. In the 17th and 18th century, they were often called the letter of marque. You may have heard that name, maybe from the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But by the 19th century, they're simply called a commission. I don't know why, but that's the terminology. I never see letter of marque, it's always commission. It's a license, so a legal document that empowers privateers to attack enemies, take their goods, and then the privateer would go in front of a court, and if they follow the rules, the court would declare what's called a good prize, meaning the goods have been captured legally. Then the privateers would get to keep that cargo that they had captured. Then they sell it, and then they divide up the proceeds. And the captain, or the owners get the most, the captain gets more, and then everybody down to the lowest sailor aboard the ship gets some of the prize money. Okay, so that's how it works. Privateers exist only during war. So there's no such thing as a peacetime privateer. It doesn't exist. And the privateers are only allowed to capture enemies. So during the War of 1812, for example, the United States is at war with Britain. They commissioned privateers. U.S. privateers are allowed to capture British ships. Not French ships or Spanish ships or anybody else, only British. Now, by contrast, a pirate. See, we're slowly getting to the pirates here. So a pirate is a vessel that captures others, but it has no legal authority to do so. It does not have a commission. So pirates do not have commissions. Pirates generally also do not limit themselves to any one nation because they're at war with everyone. Right? Theoretically, so they're at war with all. So they capture vessels from all nations. Now I've laid it out very, very neatly here. It sounds great, okay? But in practice, it's oftentimes very difficult to tell one from the other. There are hard cases that come up where maybe they have a commission, privateers have a commission, but it's from a government that's not widely recognized as legitimate. Which one is it? They have a commission, but it's not legitimate. The court needs to sort that kind of thing out. Or they have a commission, but they capture a vessel that's not an enemy, but it is carrying a couple cases of enemy goods. Can you just take enemy goods, or does it infect the whole shipment? You can take all of them. Right? So they're all things that the courts have to sort out. You see here, I have an example, a picture. This is a commission from one of from the Mexican government to a privateer in 1817. So an example of what a commission actually looks like. So there you go. Okay, one last piece to the puzzle. Where are we? Jacksonville Beach, Florida. Well, that's where we are today. 200 years ago, this is East Florida. So East Florida, that's the Spanish province where we are. There were two Floridas, East Florida and West Florida. And the border between the two was the Apalachicola River. I'm very proud of myself that I can say that. Someday someone will come and tell me I've been pronouncing it wrong the whole time. That'll encourage me to be modest in the future. So the Apalachicola River, just outside of, I want to say Florida State, no, Tallahassee, that's right. So you see what's meaningful to me as a professor is the university that's there. So just outside of Tallahassee, that's where the Central Time Zone starts, by the way, if you've ever driven in the Panhandle. That's a landmark to use. So that's West Florida, and where we are, the rest of Florida, is East Florida. That was established by the British when they took over the Floridas following the 7 Years' War. And then the Spanish got this territory back at the end of the American Revolution, and they keep that division between the two places. And so East Florida has its capital at St. Augustine. The Floridas remain loyal to Spain. So one of the Spanish colonies that remains loyal to Spain. The others, the other significant ones are Cuba and Puerto Rico. So it's more like those than like Mexico, Venezuela, the ones that become independent. The reason for having any kind of presence here, it's very small. It's in the European, or the African and European population, so non-native, is in the thousands. I mean, like single thousands, less than 10,000. So it's a very small population. It exists principally to provide protection for ships returning home from the Caribbean. So as you can see in the map here, so this is Cuba here, the Havana is out here. The way the winds and the currents run, if you want to leave from Havana, you come, or anywhere in the Caribbean, you come around this way, stop in Havana, and then go up the Bahama Channel here, between Bahamas and Florida, and catch the Gulf Stream and go back, arcing up to Spain. This also here is a great spot for pirates, or any kind of enemy that wants to capture a Spanish ship. You just wait here at the top. They can't go out this way because it's too shallow. So the Spanish want a military presence to support their ships that are passing by there to keep various threats away from their shipping. That's really the one and only reason to have a Spanish presence here at all. There's a small amount of trade, but really it's protecting the lucrative trade that has to come through that channel because they're sailing ships and you have to go where the wind and the current takes you. Okay, now to the main event. The main story here, with all those pieces in place. I can talk about the privateers and their associates who were operating out of this area. The invasion of East Florida is launched by this man here, Gregor McGregor. Gregor McGregor puts together this military force to invade East Florida, specifically Amelia Island is his first target. His goal is to expand that more generally into East Florida, but Amelia Island is where he is intending to go first. Gregor McGregor is a British officer. Can you tell what is the nation of his birth by his name? Yes. He's very Italian. He is, of course, Scottish. All these names, you couldn't make this stuff up. Or his name is Gregor McGregor. Of the clan McGregor. So Gregor McGregor. He was a British officer. He had fought in the Napoleonic Wars, principally during the Peninsular Campaign. That's where the British are supporting the Portuguese and the Spanish fighting against the French who've invaded. He serves principally in Portugal. His service is, as far as I can tell, not particularly noteworthy in any regard, except for the fact that he gets dismissed from the service. He seemed to have had a fight with one of his fellow officers, and he didn't get the respect he deserved, and he said, I'm packing it in, and he resigned his commission and left. One of the reasons I suppose that he didn't feel like he got the respect he deserved is that he claimed to be noble. He always insisted on being called Sir Gregor MacGregor. Call me Sir MacGregor. Suspiciously, the source of his nobility changed depending on the story. Sometimes he claimed that he was a lord of the clan MacGregor. Other times he claimed that he'd been given a knighthood for his service in Portugal. Apparently, fighting with your comrades is considered worthy of receiving a knighthood. That's all he did. So I don't think he's really noble, but you know, how can you really tell? So that is Gregor MacGregor. After resigning his commission, he came to Spanish America, ended up in Venezuela, and he became, in time, a Venezuelan general. He was familiar and associated with Simón Bolívar, the South American liberator. He married, I believe it's a cousin of Simón Bolívar. That always helps your career to marry into a powerful family. So that is one thing that aided his ascent to become a general. He fought in a number of engagements in Venezuela, in what's today Colombia. So he did see some action leading men into battle. Then at one point he again quarreled with his commanders and decided to leave their service and head out on his own. So to launch his own expedition where he could be his own boss and not have to take orders from anybody else. I will pause dramatically. Well, it's a small discomfort knowing that there's an emergency someplace else.
Right.
The most important part. So he sets out on this freelance expedition, really coming up with his own. This is all on his own plan, his own devising, so that he can run things the way that he wants to. The plan, as it comes together in early 1817. The plan calls for him to recruit men and gather supplies in the United States. So the United States is actually a fairly robust supporter of the Spanish-American revolutions. And by United States, I mean Americans, private citizens in the United States. The government never officially becomes a supporter of the revolutions, because then that would be pretty much becoming an ally and then having to fight against Spain. So the United States government is officially at peace, is neutral, but Americans are enthusiastic for the Spanish-American revolutions. There's one speech in Congress when they're debating whether to recognize Spanish America or not, and one of the, I think it's a congressman or a senator says, "We behold a spectacle of a nation at peace and a people at war." So the Americans are at war, the United States is at peace. So he's successful in finding supporters in the United States, although not the government officially. He obtains a commission in Philadelphia from a number of Spanish-American agents. Philadelphia was the hotspot, the center of Spanish-American activity in the United States. That's where the representatives from the various different governments all centered their activity. And he found some of them, and they gave him their blessing. They wrote out a document saying, "We authorize you to undertake operations on behalf of Venezuela and Buenos Aires and a few other places." So he has some sort of legal claim to be doing what he's doing. Okay, so he has that. The goal is to conquer Amelia Island, so that's the target. So Amelia Island is the target of his operations. The plan then is, once Amelia Island is captured, to sort of regroup, use Amelia Island as a kind of beachhead, to then support operations further into East Florida. So the idea is to establish base of operations at Amelia Island, to sponsor privateering, to hand out privateering commissions, and then the privateers would go out and they supposedly would capture Spanish vessels, bring them back into Amelia Island. MacGregor aimed to establish a prize court that would then handle those cases, give the captures the okay, right? Then those goods would be sold. The government would take a cut of that, right? A processing fee percentage of the goods that were sold. That would then generate revenue to be able to undertake further operations. Smuggling into the United States was going to be something that they envisioned doing. I guess once the government at Amelia Island had gotten its cut, where it goes after that is nobody's business, not their business. And then finally, McGregor had arranged for supplies to come to meet him in Amelia Island, more men, more food, more weapons, to undertake a larger operation onto the mainland of Florida. So that was the plan. The larger significance of this, I think the larger strategy here, is that McGregor helped to open a new front in the Spanish-American Wars. So Florida itself was not necessarily worth fighting over for the Spanish, but it needed to hold on to it to protect their shipping. So the theory is that if that colony were to fall into independent hands, no longer be loyal to Spain, well then Spain would have to divert resources to fight and try and get Florida back. And the resources that went into trying to defend or to reclaim Florida would have to be taken from someplace else. So that would take pressure off of Venezuela, off of what would become Colombia, off of Buenos Aires, off of Mexico, all those other places. There would be less attention to those because it would expand the battlefield into the Floridas also. So I think that's the larger strategic objective of what McGregor is after. The invasion itself, Amelia Island as the target. Let's take a look at Amelia Island itself. I imagine that living here, many of you have been to Amelia Island? Yes? Have you ever taken a boat or tried to swim across to Georgia? No? Have you ever stood on the end of Amelia Island and say, wow, Georgia is really close? Yeah, so yeah, see that map. Georgia is really close. Of course, I've done this. I remember years ago, we visited Amelia Island, drove to Georgia. It took like an hour. You had to go loop around, right? You can't just go straight. So that's where the Amelia Island is today. You can see the attractiveness of this because what today is the border with Georgia was then an international border between Spain and the United States. And wherever you have an international border, that means the laws are slightly different, or maybe dramatically different on one side of the border versus the other. But physically, you can move across there fairly easily. So that's part of the attraction of Amelia Island. It's on the U.S. border. It has a good harbor for shipping, meaning privateering. In this case, Fernandina is the harbor there. Good for smuggling because it's so close to the border. Good place for resupply. Again, you can get into the harbor easily. You can get access there from ports of the United States very easily. It has the best of both worlds. It's outside of the United States, so they don't have to follow U.S. law, and U.S. law enforcement can't go across the border and enforce their laws. But it's really close, so you can have access to the United States as a market, a destination for your goods, as a source of supplies, as a source of manpower. So you get both protection from the things you don't want after the United States, the law, but easy access to things you do want for the United States, the market for your goods and the supplies that can easily come over. Okay, so that's the attraction of Amelia Island. And no, McGregor did not bury his gold there or anything like that. So don't get any ideas, you're going to find it. I should have said that. I should have said I'm forming an expedition to find McGregor's gold. Next talk, I'll remember to do it that way. We'll take investors before, get the money first, and then you feel there's nothing there later. And the invasion itself. The invasion itself happened, the anniversary was just very recently, on June 29, 1817. Would you believe me if I told you that I forgot all about it? I was reviewing my notes for the presentation, and I realized, oh, it just happened, it passed. I didn't do anything about it. I knew it was coming up, but I'm not going to be around for the 300th anniversary, so I really would. So June 29, 1817. About 100 men showed up under McGregor's control, and they scared away the Spanish defenders. So this anticlimactic, there's not really a battle. There's only a couple dozen Spanish garrison there in Fernandina itself. There have been rumors that there were thousands of men coming after them, and they easily surrendered. MacGregor then proclaims the Amelia Island liberated, independent. He names the new colony La República de las Floridas. So he gives it a new name. He designs a flag that he hoists to show with pride that this is a new place, no longer Spanish. So that's the flag. Can you guess who designed it? MacGregor himself. So MacGregor designed his own flag. He dabbles in design on the side. An attractive Greek cross. He also had a commemorative medal struck. On the one side here, it's in Latin. It says Amalia Vini Vidi Vici. Does anyone remember where that comes from? The Caesar, exactly. That's what Caesar wrote when he conquered Gaul. So we have conquerors who are equal in importance. Julius Caesar conquering Gaul. Sir Gregor MacGregor conquering Amelia Island. These were equal feats of arms. And then on the back it says Libertas Floridarium Duce Mac Gregorio. And you thought I was kidding when I said he was Italian. There we go, Latin motto there. Okay, so he has a commemorative medal struck to honor the occasion. MacGregor is in charge of Amelia Island for 2 months. I guess if I remember, I can commemorate his leaving Amelia Island. I'll put that on the calendar of my phone when I'm done here. So MacGregor is in charge for 2 months because things do not go as planned. He doesn't commission very many vessels for privateering. I counted one time. It's no more than 10. I think about 3 of those are commissioned like in the last week as he's leaving. So very few vessels are commissioned. Some privateers commissioned by other countries, Venezuela, Mexico, they do come in. So there is some goods that are coming in during this period, but not a very large volume. There's not very much smuggling that takes place because there's no privateers. That's not generating the goods, and it's not generating the transport them to the United States. It's a very big resupply problem. So he arranged for a ship to come from New York, bringing more men, more guns, more food, following after his initial invasion. And that ship is detained in New York by the customs collector. Right? So when you're shipping out to a foreign port, you're supposed to file paperwork at the customs house. The customs collector is on his game, and he knows that there's something suspicious. There's something very suspicious. This vessel, usually a merchant ship, but like a dozen men maybe. This one has like 80. You might need a few weapons to fight off, dangerous people. This one has hundreds of weapons. It has, huge casks of water, a lot of food. You ask the captain, so what's going on? What's with all these guys? What's food and all these guns? What's the captain supposed to say? I get lonely and thirsty. We like to shoot things. No, the customs collector makes him take off everything that he doesn't think is really needed for a merchant voyage. So he shows the resupply doesn't bring very many supplies, men, food, weapons, that kind of thing. MacGregor sees that he doesn't have the forces to be able to continue the invasion moving forward. He just doesn't have the manpower to continue, or the food really to keep continuing. So he abandons his Amelia Island project. He takes to a ship and he sails away. Just as a coda to MacGregor's story before moving on Amelia Island story, he shows up again in Central America, carrying out a land fraud. He's selling like 1,000% of shares in a land development company in Central America. You didn't need to flee Florida to do that. That's how Florida was made, right? In the 20th century. So that's where he ends up next, is in Central America, selling land to a country that he says that he set himself up as the big chief of. So a similar kind of thing that he tries to pull off later on. Okay, so that's what happens to Gregor MacGregor. Amelia Island gets a new life. a second act to the story, very quickly following after McGregor leaves. There's a short period where McGregor's left, but there's some men who are left behind who want to stay in Amelia Island, want to try and make a go of it still, even without McGregor's leadership. So they're probably happy to have McGregor out of the way. So they try to make a go of it. And their first order of business is to defend themselves against the Spanish counterattack. The Spanish, once they're chased out, they're not just going to let this go. They regroup in St. Augustine and send another force to attack Amelia Island. So that's what they are attempting to do. The remnant, the men left behind, they are actually successful. They defeat the Spanish a second time. So the Spanish are not able to reclaim Amelia Island from McGregor's leftovers, the guys who are left behind. Those guys then try to set up a new government. You're going to share power. That lasts for 2 days because, just coincidentally, a new figure shows up. This man here, Commodore Louis Michel Ory. Right? The Spanish version is Luis, calls himself Luis sometimes, also Louis Michel Ory. So he shows up just 2 days after the Spanish have been defeated. Again, it's kind of a coincidence, there's only those two days. He's able to push aside the guys who would follow after McGregor. So he pushes them out of the way. Commodore Ory had been a privateer. He was a privateer on behalf of France during the Napoleonic Wars. So he was a privateer, a French privateer in the Caribbean. In 1810, 1811-ish, in there. Then he becomes a privateer for Cartagena, joins the Cartagena Navy. He also becomes an associate of Simón Bolívar, and he has a falling out with Bolívar over who gets to command what. He leaves Bolívar's service and takes up with an expedition to invade Spanish Texas on behalf of the Mexican revolutionaries. Did you write down all the different countries he served? This is where there's a class where they're like, do I have to know that? It was France, Cartagena, which was the city-state in what's today, city-state at the time, but a major city in Colombia today. Then Mexico, and then kind of out on his own, sort of with Mexico. Okay, so all those different countries that he's acting on behalf of. So the privateer, Mexican filibuster. Filibuster was like a private military expedition on land. That's what he gets involved with. Was helping to support these land invasions into Texas on behalf of Mexico. He shows up and takes charge of Amelia Island. What he has that they're lacking, he has food and supplies. He also has manpower. He had recently stopped in Haiti, picked up more men, and then headed to Amelia Island. The reason why he left Texas, he was pushed out of the way out of Texas by Jean and Pierre Lafitte, you may have heard of, who were smugglers in Louisiana. So they pushed him out of Texas. He then sails to Amelia Island and pushes those guys out of the way. So he takes over and he declared himself a chief of the Mexican Republic. So Amelia Island, if you buy Ory's claim, was once part of Mexico. Are you keeping track of how many places Amelia Island has belonged to over here? This is said to be a self-portrait. I'm never going to confirm if that is Ory, and if it is Ory, if he actually drew that. That's what I've heard, but I've never confirmed that. So I'll just put it there tentatively. Ory's operations, they are much more successful than McGregor had been. So he is able to operate privateering more successfully. One newspaper in the United States estimated that in the fall of 1817, Ory saw $500,000 worth of prize goods come through Amelia Island. If you multiply by 10, that's a good, easy way to get an estimate of what that value would be today. So $5 million in a much smaller economy. Okay, so that's significant. He was also very adept at slave trading. So slaves were, it's not a good way to put it, they're part of the property that was captured from privateers, or captured by privateers. They captured slave ships. Right? The slaves are valuable and can be sold for money and transported to the United States. I counted between 600 and 950 people. That's it seems like a wide range, right? That's like 50% range there. The records, it's one of the things where we would care a lot about this, like how many people were actually brought through. The records at the time were very loose. Like, maybe 20 people, about a dozen. Somewhere around 100 on the ship. They just won't seem interested in quantifying how many people. Because in the mentality of the time, it's like, what are you going to do? Count the number of grains of sugar? No, give a rough estimate. Your rough estimate of the number of people, because at the time, it's not significant. They just don't care to give that extra care to these are people whose lives are being affected this way. So that's why the wide range. Ori, he started to set up an official government. He was in the process of drafting the Constitution. There were two government officials, two journalists who came from Buenos Aires, who came to draw up a constitution. And they were trying to model it on the US Constitution. They had the Federalist Papers to work from. And so this was going to be hopefully an official thing. And so that was the goal of Ori. One of the reasons that Ori is so effective is that he's able to take advantage of some loopholes in US law. Okay, so some loopholes in US law that allow him to operate. Even though the United States knows about what's going on, they cannot stop him because they lack the legal authority on these specific points that Ori takes advantage of very well. One of them has to do with the use of rowboats. So the customs laws at the time apply to vessels above a certain size, 10 tons. And ton here is a measure of volume, not of weight. All right, and it's like cubic, right? Length times height. So it's not very big. 10 is not very big. The theory being that anything below that is not going to carry enough stuff that's worth the value that would make it justified to put in the effort to actually try and police it. Okay, so it's too small to really worry about. Ordinarily that would be fine, except that Amelia Island is so close to Georgia that a rowboat you can go back and forth with a rowboat, and if you do it enough times, you can take a significant amount of goods. So you have enough rowboats doing this. So the customs authorities know this is happening, but because the vessel is too small, they're not authorized to intervene. There's no law that applies in this situation. So Ori is able to get supplies coming over to Amelia Islands, will send goods, sometimes slaves, over to Georgia, go back and forth, and as a quote here, this is a report from a naval officer. He's reporting to his officials, and he says, the people of Amelia Island, can smuggle one or two boats at a time without detection. It's easy to do. Another loophole in the law is the neutrality of the United States. So the United States is neutral between Spain and its colonies. And one of the obligations of being neutral is that you treat both sides equally, which means that you recognize the legitimacy of the rebelling colonies just as much as Spain. So you're not allowed to give favoritism to Spain simply because it's more enduring, long-lasting, that kind of thing. You treat both sides equally. So if McGregor claims to be the leader of a revolutionary republic, well, the face together sort of take it at face value. If Ori claims to be the head of a Mexican republic, sort of take it at face value. At least that's the attitude early on. Again, a report back from a naval official. He reports, and he said, I see all this stuff happening, but I consider it neutral ground. And it was the wish of the government not to infringe. So, right to his superiors, to the Secretary of the Navy, saying, I'm following orders here. I could stop them, but the government has not made a political decision about how to treat those countries, so he just lets it go. So Ori takes advantage of that very well. Here's a commission that Ori issued from Amelia Island. You can see that it is in Spanish, if you're able to read that. And you can see he calls the issues is from the República Mexicana. So, and he has, this is his title here. This is his title at the bottom in Spanish. So fully embracing the ideal of being a legitimate Spanish-American republic. Now, how the story ends here. The United States does eventually intervene. At the end of 1817, the United States intervenes militarily, and they chase Ori out. I should have given you a spoiler alert there. Ruined the end of the story. But it kind of ends with a whimper, so it's not really worth building up to dramatically. The decision to do something militarily, to invade Amelia Island, was more difficult than it might seem. First of all, they don't want to offend Spain. If the United States goes into what Spain claims is its territory, Spain might like it that they're chasing out these rebels. As you're operating, you're committing piracy there, that Spain would certainly claim. But don't want the United States to stay, the United States that has it. And so irritating Spain, angering Spain is one consideration. The United States really doesn't want to anger Spain because they don't want Spain to then go to its ally Britain and then get into war with Britain. It's not worth it from the US point of view. They also don't want to offend Spanish Americans. Right? They pledged neutrality. So kind of walk that line between those two groups there. It's also just a practical problem here. The new government, James Monroe becomes president in 1817. He holds his first cabinet meeting in October of 1817. So at this point, the inauguration is March. So what is that, 6-7 months before they actually get everybody together in one place? John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State, is coming from Europe. Okay, so they don't really get things moving until the fall anyway, so that's another practical reason. Eventually, over the fall in 1817, Monroe comes to adopt 4 lines of thinking, converge to decide for a military response to the invasion of Amelia Island. First reason has to do with violations of U.S. law. U.S. revenue law with the smuggling, U.S. piracy law, capturing vessels out of that area, U.S. neutrality law, right, American citizens sailing on behalf of Spanish-American countries, joining McGregor's operation, joining Ori's operation to attack Spain. Those are all forbidden. Slave trade law. So the international slave trade was forbidden in 1808. So it's illegal to introduce slaves from abroad into the United States. So those 4 areas of law, there are violations being committed through Amelia Island. Another factor that comes together is that Amelia Island was actually the fourth center of this type of Spanish-American privateering to prop up along the United States. There are also privateers who operated out of Baltimore, privateers who operated out of New Orleans and the Louisiana coast, privateers who operated out of Texas, not too far from the Louisiana coast. So the fact that this was the 4th one, it seems like this is getting worse and worse and worse. So there's more of a motivation to stop this now than to let it go as they have been doing previously. John Quincy Adams, in particular, convinces Monroe that there's no reason to respect the claims of McGregor or Ori for legitimacy. That these are not legitimate governments. How Ori's commission from Mexico authorizes him to seize land in Florida doesn't really track. The commission that McGregor had seems legitimate, but the fact that he received it in Philadelphia, that violates United States law right then and there. You're not allowed to receive a foreign commission in the United States. So McGregor has this thing, right? If he were to present this in court, right? I have authorization. The prosecutor would say, great, that's a confession that you have broken the law. That's no defense. And then the government said, well, if it's delivered illegally, it has no legal standing, we don't need to respect it. Finally, there was a convenient law that came in handy for just this occasion. The so-called No Transfer Resolution of 1811. This is a law that was secret when it was first enacted. So a secret law passed by Congress in 1811. Do we have secret laws anymore? Well, how would you know? Right? I hope not, but how would you know, right? If something comes up, no, we have a secret law that authorized this. So there's a secret law. It had been enacted in 1811 with the idea, so what the No Transfer Resolution said, what it did is it authorized the United States President to use military force to take Florida in the event that it was threatened by a foreign power, a non-Spanish foreign power. Okay, let me run through that again. So if it looked like Florida was going to go to a country not Spain, someone other than Spain was going to get Florida, the United States president was authorized to intervene to stop that. The thinking at the time was that maybe Britain would seize Florida, and the United States would have Britain on its coast. Okay, so that was the fear. The British would get Florida away from the Spanish. Then the Spanish wouldn't have Florida to negotiate with the United States, to give the United States, right? So that's the theory. That comes in very handy in this situation. A non-Spanish government, Spanish-American governments, have taken Florida, so that authorizes the president to intervene. The event itself, in December of 1817, where the United States Navy and Army show up, it's anticlimactic. It ends with a whimper. They show up, say, we intend to land and to take over, and Orr says, all right, give me a little bit of time, I'll get out. So they march in, they play Yankee Doodle, the newspaper accounts say, and they hoist the American flag. Orry then sails away, and that's it. So that ends the story there. Orry, just to follow up on him, he also he went deeper into the Caribbean and attempted to set up on another little island off the coast of Central America. And he dies soon after that in the 1820s when he is kicked in the head by a horse. So kind of inglorious end. But I mean, this kind of thing has happened in the 19th century, right? Fall of a horse. Died. He was only, I think he was in his late 20s, early 30s. He wasn't that old. So he packed a lot of life into a short amount of time. The United States does not give Amelia Island back. And the United States then, the Spanish protest this, but it becomes moot when the United States buys Florida from Spain as part of the Transcontinental Treaty. That becomes official in the early 1820s. That's the treaty by which Florida, all of Florida, becomes part of the United States. It settles the border with Spain out west and gives some of the Oregon territory to the United States. The United States then reaches all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And so Florida became part of the United States in the Transcontinental Treaty, but Amelia Island was there first. It was there earlier by a couple of years, occupied by the United States. It's a slightly longer history of being part of the United States. Well, I want to thank you again for coming out tonight and for being such a wonderful audience and being so gracious as to invite me here to speak with you. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes? Okay. So I'd be happy to answer your questions here. I also want to do a piece of shameless self-promoting. Okay. I have copies of my book that I'd be happy to sign and, well, to sell to you, and then sign. For $22. That's lower than Amazon, so you're breaking up your cell phone to check the price here, like, you know, for Best Buy or something. Yeah, you do better here. I'd be happy to do that for you if I manage to pique your interest. So thank you once again, and I look forward to your questions.
What typically happened to the crews of the ships that privateers took?
What typically happened to them? Well, if they weren't killed at sea, that's always the category that's overlooked. Right? Some all kinds of dangers. They were generally not punished. Okay, so there were only a handful of piracy cases that actually went to trial. And in that handful of piracy cases, there are a couple of dramatic ones where 30, 40 guys are convicted, but almost all of those are pardoned by the president. Actually, technically they're respited, so kind of put off the prosecution, put off the punishment, not necessarily full pardon. But there's, I think it's in 1819 or 1820, there are a series of executions where there are basically, the authorities say, choose 2 guys for the major ports, for Savannah, for Charleston, for Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, and execute 2 guys in each of those places. There's a warning to everybody else. So there are a handful of executions of some of these guys. And the thing is, it's really, it's not the leaders who are punished like that. It's the sort of ordinary sailors who are the only ones who get it in the end. The prosecutions are not very successful. But again, most of the sailors who participated in these privateering operations were not punished, never brought. And what happened to them? They went back into whatever lives they had before. Generally not able to recover individual cases of the ordinary sailors. Captains, some cases the captains, yes. So some captains, for example, from Baltimore, I've been able to trace out what happened to them later in life. That's the last chapter in the book, has a couple of examples of these Baltimore sea captains. One of them, he gets rich, basically, from privateering, and retires from the sea when he's as basically a gentleman. He's able to build a big house in a nice neighborhood. He has like 5 or 6 kids. One of his youngest son he named Bolivar. The influence there. That was actually a thing, like a fad in the 1820s, was to name children Bolivar or Bolivar. Sometimes the spelling gives you a clue to how they were pronounced, but it's not the regular way. It's like all different ways. So some of them do go on to live comfortably afterwards, based on the goods that they were able to capture at the time. Other questions? Yes?
Have you ever looked into see if there's any relatives left of Blackbeard in the Mid-Island?
Have I ever looked in to see if there are any relatives left? No, I haven't. I haven't really dedicated to that kind of research. I don't have any relatives who are involved. That's where it comes from. There's one guy, again, a Baltimore captain. There's a guy somehow heard about my research, and he was related to one of the Baltimore captains. And we had corresponded, and he was actually instrumental in, he found a picture of the captain. Very late in my research, he was able to find another relative who had a picture. And that was wonderful. This person I've been reading, I read his letters, I read his papers, all this stuff, and I never knew what he looked like. And then finally, after several years, able to have a picture of him. But no, I've never done any kind of genealogical research into the people who were there. It just hasn't come up. Yes?
Yeah. What exactly did Blackbeard do to set him aside from those other people? He did not fare as well as the rest of them. Was it because he attacked American ships, or?
Well, okay, so what's the deal with Blackbeard, if I can summarize your question? Blackbeard is 1718 through 1720, I believe, so before the United States. Blackbeard he was a real person. He's shrouded in a lot of myth-making and romancing. That's easier to spell on paper than to speak. Why is he so widely known? I think it's because he had this great image, right, of his wild hair and his name of Blackbeard. And there's one of the most influential sources on piracy was a book published in the 1720s. And has this wonderful description of Blackbeard, what he looked like, and how he operated. And it has like dialogue from a battle where Blackbeard was killed by the British officer. You can read this and you wonder, like, they're shouting things back to each other, Blackbeard and the officer. Like, you ever try to talk to somebody on the beach, right? It's kind of hard sometimes, right? Because it's loud. How are they going to have a conversation? So that material is really kind of skeptical about. I'm really kind of skeptical about what he actually did. It seems like, again, Blackbeard's a real person. He really did plunder vessels for a short amount of time, a couple of years, in the 1710s, 1720s, before he was killed in battle by the British Navy. Beyond that, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot you can say for certain, except that he had a really awesome image that has endured since that time. So that's Blackbeard's story as much as I know it. So it's a wonderful source on him, but a lot of it's just too good to be true. And I don't know that there's a whole lot solid material on him to be able to resolve what's real and what's not. Yes?
You said already stopped off from Haiti to get more
Yes.
provision soldiers. At that point, Haiti would have been one of the 99% black.
Yes, so this is when Haiti is independent, it's free. So it's the first black republic. And most of the sailors are black then. And one of the things I didn't talk about, but becomes a source of tension, is that So Ori shows up with 50 black guys, black sailors, and many of McGregor's original followers have been recruited in Charleston and Savannah, so they're mostly white, and they don't get along especially well. And actually, one of the things that gets some U.S. government attention are complaints from Georgia, especially the Georgia senator at the time, is complaining that, look, we have all these Haitians right on our coast. There's an enormous fear of Haitian slaves. There's a fear that somehow the ideal of slave rebellion would spread into the United States, and there'd be all these kind of bloody uprisings inspired by Haitian or West Indian slaves. You see this a lot. So the presence of these Haitian sailors in Amelia, it comes together. The politics are really weird because the slave owners are upset about Amelia Island and the presence of these Haitian sailors there. But then abolitionists are really upset about what abolitionist movement there is in this period. They're really upset about Amelia Island too because introducing slaves to the United States. So both anti-slavery and pro-slavery are both against Amelia Island. And that's one of the things that then comes together to encourage action. They both have an interest in keeping slaves out. Right? The abolitionists because they're against all slavery, and the Southern slave owners because they're against Haitians. So that comes together in a really strange way, that both ends come together and combine and encourage the U.S. government to do something. Yes?
Have you done research on Jedediah Kingsley? He was a privateer and a slave owner before he had his plantation on St. George Island, which is right next to Amelia.
Okay, no, that name does not ring a bell for me. Yeah, Kingsley.
It's the oldest southern plantation in Florida.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. Happy to get that lead. Kingsley Plantation. Very good. Thanks for passing that along.
One in the back there.
Yes?
I just had it's kind of a similar question to the gentleman over there, but did McGregor ever attempted slave trade as well and it didn't go very well, or do you think it did try and find it more successful?
No, so he seizes. So when McGregor invades, a lot of the civilian population flees from the island of Fernandina, but there are a number of slaves, a handful of slaves who are left behind. He seizes them and sells them. Right? But it's less than 20, might be less than 10. I have the numbers in the book. Honestly, I kind of block out the numbers part of it. I spent a really miserable afternoon one day counting slaves who came through the island, and that's not good. That weighs heavily on you. But again, I think so. So did he have any objection to trading slaves? No. He just simply wasn't able to get any in after that initial that he seized. One story that comes to mind is that there was some McGregor privateers. They were raiding up and down plantations up and down the coast in this area, and they were chased off. They weren't successful. So the local patrol got word of this, and then they ran them off. So the only attempt at middle document was unsuccessful. But again, it's probably not for lack of wanting to; it's just wasn't able to carry it out.
One last question. Anybody have a last question? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So David will be sticking around for a little while. If you have any other burning questions or not burning questions, please come on up. And as he mentioned, he does have a book up here available for sale. And please fill out your survey. We really appreciate your feedback. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next month for Brittany with Manhattan Beach.
Mary, I'll see you tomorrow.